When Mansa Musa traveled through Cairo, gold lost its value. Not metaphorically. Literally. The metal that had anchored Mediterranean trade for centuries, the foundation of wealth from Genoa to Damascus, suddenly became abundant. Common. Devalued. A single man's generosity triggered inflation that destabilized regional economies for over a decade. This is not legend. This is documented economic history. The year was 1324. And the man who crashed markets with charity commanded more wealth than anyone before or since. His name was Mansa Musa. Emperor of Mali. Controller of half the world's gold. The first sovereign to weaponize abundance at imperial scale. To understand Musa's empire, you must first understand the geography of power in 14th century West Africa. While Europe fumbled through plague and feudal fragmentation, the Mali Empire stretched across territory larger than Western Europe itself. From the Atlantic coast to the salt mines of Tagaza. From the forests of modern Guinea to the Saharan trade corridors that connected Africa to the Islamic world. This was not peripheral territory. This was the center of global trade. Two commodities governed survival and status across three continents, salt and gold. Salt preserved food in an era before refrigeration. Gold underwrote currencies from Cairo to Venice. And Mali controlled both. The salt mines to the north. The gold fields to the south. Every caravan that crossed the Sahara paid tribute to Musa's empire. Timbuktu wasn't a metaphor for distant irrelevance. It was a financial hub. A city of scholars, astronomers, legal theorists, and merchants who traded not just goods but ideas. Universities predating Oxford. Libraries holding hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. An African Renaissance while Europe was still clawing out of the Dark Ages. And at the center of this system sat Mansa Musa. Not as a warlord. As a monopolist. Musa inherited an empire already rich. But inheritance and expansion are different instruments of wealth. His predecessor had consolidated trade routes. Musa consolidated production. The gold mines of Bambuk, Bure, and Gollum became instruments of state policy. Not randomly exploited, but systematically controlled. Output regulated. Supply managed. Musa understood something that would take Europe centuries to formalize, that scarcity creates value, and he who controls supply controls price. Medieval economies ran on gold the way modern economies run on oil. Currency systems from the Mediterranean to the Middle East depended on steady flows of West African gold to maintain monetary stability. Musa's mines didn't just produce wealth. They underwrote the liquidity of three continents. Imagine a single nation controlling 60% of global oil reserves. Now imagine that nation's leader deciding to flood the market. That's the scale we're discussing. Musa didn't just possess wealth. He possessed the mechanism of wealth itself. But possession without deployment is sterile. Musa's genius, and ultimately his economic disruption, lay in what he chose to do with it. In 1324, Mansa Musa embarked on hajj. The pilgrimage to Mecca required by Islamic law. What followed was not a spiritual journey. It was an economic event that reshaped North African and Middle Eastern markets for a generation. He traveled with 60,000 attendants. Soldiers, officials, merchants, griots, and slaves. 500 servants, each carrying a 4-pound staff of solid gold. 100 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of gold. Architects to design mosques. Scholars to exchange knowledge. And Musa himself, draped in silk and gold, distributing wealth at every stop. When he entered Cairo, the market convulsed. Musa didn't lend or invest his gold. He gave it away. To scholars. To beggars. To anyone who approached. He purchased goods at prices that made merchants weep with joy. He commissioned buildings, funding construction projects with handfuls of gold dust. For 3 months, Cairo bathed in liquidity. And then the market broke. Gold flooded the supply faster than demand could absorb. Prices inflated. The currency destabilized. What had been valuable became common. Merchants who had sold goods for Musa's gold discovered their wealth had evaporated. The Egyptian gold dinar lost 25% of its value. Trade contracts written in gold became worthless. This was the first recorded instance of monetary oversupply crashing a regional economy. Centuries before John Law's Mississippi bubble. Centuries before Weimar's hyperinflation. Mansa Musa accidentally invented, and demonstrated, the consequences of quantitative easing gone wrong. On his return journey, Musa recognized the damage. He borrowed gold from Cairo's money lenders at exorbitant interest rates, pulling liquidity back out of the market. An attempt at economic stabilization. Primitive central banking performed by an emperor who had just learned that even infinite wealth obeys the laws of supply and demand. But here's what separates Musa from mere accumulators of wealth. He understood that gold was instrumental, not terminal. That wealth unused is wealth wasted. That power requires not just accumulation but transformation. His pilgrimage wasn't just piety. It was brand architecture at civilizational scale. Every coin distributed, every mosque commissioned, every scholar hosted, these were investments in perception. He was constructing a narrative that would outlive his reign. Positioning Mali not as a regional power but as a peer to Cairo, Mecca, and Damascus. Reputation is a form of capital. Musa spent gold to purchase legitimacy, respect, and fear. When European cartographers finally mapped Africa, they placed Musa at the center, seated on a throne, holding a golden orb. Not because Europeans had visited Mali, but because the story of his wealth had traveled further than his caravan ever did. This is soft power centuries before the term existed. Sovereign wealth deployed as propaganda. He didn't conquer Cairo. He bought its memory of him. Musa returned to Mali with architects from Cairo and Andalusia. He commissioned the Djinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu, still standing today. He expanded the Sankore University into a center of Islamic jurisprudence that rivaled Al-Azhar. He built trade infrastructure, caravanserais, and wells across the Sahara, increasing the volume and safety of trans-Saharan commerce. His investments transformed wealth from metal into institutions. Gold funded architecture. Architecture legitimized dynasties. Knowledge attracted scholars. Scholars produced texts that attracted more scholars. A flywheel of intellectual and financial capital that turned Timbuktu into a city where a book could be worth more than gold. This is the difference between rich and generative. Rich is accumulation. Generative is system building. Musa understood that empires endure not because of what they hoard, but because of what they construct. But even systems have limits. Mansa Musa died around 1337. The Mali Empire outlasted him by 2 centuries, but never with the same concentration of wealth or strategic clarity. His successors inherited the gold mines but not the vision. They had the assets without the architecture. And here's the lesson that history offers, cold and precise. Musa proved that wealth at sufficient scale becomes its own force, capable of destabilizing markets, constructing cities, and rewriting how civilizations perceive power. But he also proved the paradox of abundance. That too much liquidity erodes value. That generosity without economic discipline creates chaos. That even gold, the ultimate store of value, becomes worthless when supply overwhelms demand. His Cairo inflation wasn't a failure of strategy. It was a demonstration of limits. A lesson that wealth can move markets, but only wisdom can sustain them. Modern economies still wrestle with Musa's problem. Central banks print currency and trigger inflation. Sovereign wealth funds deploy capital and distort markets. Billionaires pledge philanthropy that reshapes sectors without accountability. The scale has changed. The mechanics remain identical. Mansa Musa was the richest man who ever lived. But his legacy isn't his gold. It's the proof that abundance without structure is just another form of instability. That wealth is power only when paired with restraint. That the hardest thing to manage isn't scarcity. It's surplus. He built an empire of gold. And taught the world that even gold obeys gravity.